So we're back, and I want to introduce you to Kelly Ball. She is Region 1 Community Affairs Manager, and Alia Burck. She is Region 4 Community Affairs Coordinator, and I've had the wonderful task of working with them prior to this. They're professionals, they're great communications professionals, and they're here to help you out in that area. Ladies, take it away.
All right. Thank you for having us here today, right after your lunch. So that means everybody's energized, you've all had fuel, you're not tired at all, and you're ready to talk, right? Yeah? We are going to be asking that everybody engage with us. That is part of community involvement. I mean, we want people in the audience to engage. We want questions, we welcome that. So you don't have to wait until the end and ask it as we go. So let me give you, we're going to introduce ourselves, give you a little bit of our backgrounds, and tell you why we're up here in front of you. And then we're going to jump right into the slides. And so my name's Kelly Ball, Region 1 Community Affairs Manager. And I've been doing public involvement, communication, conflict resolution work for a little over 20 years. I can't say that quiet when I'm mic'd up, right? So a little over 20 years. And I believe in the work. I think it's really critical to have the community involved and engaged in our government projects. I like to give a little story about this and why I believe in it and why I think it's really important. Early in my career, one of my mentors told me the story and it really resonated. I think many of you in here may have already heard it. So it's a little more on the problem-solving model. There's two people, they're arguing. They're arguing because there's only one orange, and they both want it. They both need it, and they've both identified having that orange, that's the solution. They're arguing, arguing, arguing. Finally, they decide, maybe we should stop for a minute, and we should talk this out. Well, I'm going to make it fast in case you've heard the story before. The punchline is one needed the orange to make juice. One needed the rind of the orange to make a recipe, so like the zest of an orange. So the moral of the story is they both could have had what they needed if they were to just take a little bit of time and talk about it. So how this relates to public involvement? From the ODOT side, we need to take just a little bit of time to explain, we need to take just a little bit of time to explain the why. Why do we need to be doing what we're doing? Making the business case. If a project is in project delivery, there has been a strong business case made already. So just explaining that to the community. And from the community perspective, us community affairs folks, we are there to help suss out from the community what their needs are. What is their why? Oftentimes, we always go right for a solution. We go right to the place where it's like, we need this. We identify it. But that's not necessarily what we always need. So that's why I enjoy doing this work, and I enjoy being here with you today to talk a little bit more about it. So with that, I'm going to let Alia introduce herself, and then we'll jump in.
Okay. Yeah, hi guys. As was said, my name is Alia Burck, and I am the Community Affairs Coordinator for Region 4. And yeah, as we were working on our presentation materials over the last couple weeks, one of the things that I started thinking about was a good way to explain what I do and what we do. And one thing that I want to add to the orange story is this idea that in the project delivery side of what we do, there's a lot that happens. There's a lot of moving pieces. We have all our disciplines, and oftentimes it can feel like there's a wall between us and the communities we serve. And so I really like to think of it as us kind of straddling that wall, communicating what's being done on one side that might seem a little elusive to people who don't know our line of work very intuitively. So I would just ask you guys throughout this presentation to think back to maybe your first week of work at ODOT. I don't know what it was like for everyone. I can't speak to that, but I know for me, my first week of work was pretty overwhelming because there was a lot to learn. And so just think from a community perspective, that overwhelming feeling is probably what they have throughout our project process because they aren't familiar with our terminology and the things that we do and why we're seeking to do it. So it's good to just remember that we're experts here, and that is what our community affairs people are trying to do, is bring the expert side to a relatable level where we can explain it so there's a common understanding.
So, great. All right, so we're gonna jump in here to the slides. So the one thing we're not gonna do today is we're not gonna teach you how to be a public involvement person. It's a whole profession. There's people who have made a career of this. In fact, we have our own international association. So we are a legitimate profession out there. So what we're here to do is we're here to make sure you have a good foundation. Some of you I know have to engage in the community affairs work and the public involvement work as project leads, project managers. You are responsible for the public involvement plans, making sure those are happening. We're going to be making a case for you partnering with your community affairs folks or your public affairs folks. We'll get into the difference between those in your region to get those plans done. In my region, the community affairs folks actually do those plans themselves and work with the project managers. But we know you have some responsibilities, so we want you to be thinking about public involvement. Plus, you have a view of a project that not everyone has, because you're seeing all of it. And you're going to see things that us community affairs folks aren't going to see. You're going to see opportunities that the community can be involved and have some ownership. And so we're going to need that as a partnership to be able to really meet the community's expectations. So what is public involvement? What do you think? What's public involvement? Say it again. Involve the public. Involving the public. Great start. Getting input. Input, yeah. Okay, information sharing. Informed consent. Now we're getting deep. It's good. It's good. What else? Problem resolution. Okay. Transparency. Great. All right, I wrote down a couple of words here. We use the term generically, public involvement. What it often is interchanged with is public information, public outreach, public engagement, and then the public involvement. There's kind of a spectrum there. We're going to talk about the spectrum in a minute, and all of those words that you talked about. So what has your experience been with public involvement? Sunshine and unicorns? Varied? Scary. Okay. Exactly. Yeah, it can be. I know people in here have been involved with public involvement. Great experiences, bad experiences. Complicated. In the back.
Well, if you run into a fearful community about anything of your project, be it a business owner or a residential owner, it's very stressful for them, and they'll make your life miserable.
Okay.
I mean, it's a lion's den. Your community is not accepting of the project.
So it's going to take a lot of time and energy. Okay. I'd like to get a flavor of the room in terms of what are we thinking about community involvement? Yeah.
Disappointing for me because I had a big meeting planned, we had it in a nice place and facility, and 2 people showed up.
So a lot of time and energy went into that, and you built it, and they didn't come. Okay.
They will give you their wish list.
Wish list. Then what do you do with that? Right? Yeah.
For me, I've had to say, I'm same region, right? So I had a public involvement thing, nobody showed up. Right?
Ooh.
And then so we get to the project, we put all this stuff in the newspaper, and then people are saying, nobody ever talked to us about this, right? I mean, we've had newspaper articles, we've had door-to-door contacts, we've had all this stuff.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, so it's disappointing for me, you know, as a project manager, because I feel like there's just no way to actually be successful at that sometimes. Because
Yeah.
the cards are stacked against
So if you, again, you build it and no one shows up, you said disappointing. When you were saying that story, what I was hearing is deflating. Because if you put all that work into something and nobody shows up, then you probably, the next project, you're not as gung-ho on wanting to get involved. All right, but then later on they said some things about nobody told us, and so that's just okay. So we're going to talk about some things. I saw some more hands. This is good. See, this is the warm up. You guys are all just we're going to talk. So this is good. Do you have anything you want to add before we go on to the next slide?
I think just kind of what we had already been saying. It's just transparency is probably the big one that we touched a little bit on, but we'll touch more on.
Okay. So in your slides, I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit to give you a little sample of where we're going. We're going to talk about the people within your regions that you can talk to that have expertise in this area. And sometimes those are community affairs folks. Sometimes those are public affairs folks. Sometimes those are communications folks. And I slip into the habit of just calling things communications. I'm meaning communications with a little c because we'll describe it a little bit later. We're all communicating about the project. But you're going to want to engage those folks for some of these things, like when you're talking about setting something up, and I'm in front of that again, setting something up and finding out that no one showed up. Going out and doing a whole lot of advertising and not getting any feedback forms. There are some things that we can do to help with that. That's not to say that there's a magic button, but we can help with that. So let's talk a little bit more as I go on to the next slide. This is going to be dangerous for me up here. So I'm either going to block your view or I'm going to trip. So this will be fun. I'm going to get on this side if that's okay. So I'll stand right here and I'll hang on. All right, so let's talk about the IAP2 spectrum of public participation. And there was a handout, and I see she is handing that out right now. This up here on the screen is a bit of an eye chart. It's also a bit of an eye chart in your document, but this is the same handout that's going around. So I mentioned that we had an association. This is developed by that association, the International Association of Public Participation. And this particular document is used by professionals all over the place as a spectrum of what community involvement, what public participation looks like. It was developed in the 90s, and it was based on some work that was done in the 60s. And there are classes on this whole thing. So we're not going to do that today about what it is and how it was created. Let's just assume that it was created by professionals, and we know that it's very well used. So on this spectrum, it talks about how you get the community involved. And it starts on the very left-hand side with inform. And as you go to the right-hand side and move across the table, it is increased impact on the decision, the community's increased impact on a decision. And so it's not saying that one of these columns is the right column. It's not saying that anybody is supposed to always be on the empower side because that's the arrow that goes that direction. But what it is saying is that there's times in a project for all of these different elements. And I'm going to go through each one of these, but I'm going to say in project delivery, when you're doing design and construction, we're going to live a little bit more in the inform and consult side. So we're going to live a little bit more on the left side of the spectrum there. But there's opportunities, and when I said you all have a window into a project that no one else does, you have an opportunity to look for some of those opportunities for the community to get involved and to move the dial a little more to the right. So that first column there, that's inform, that's providing basic information. I would say we are really good at that. As ODOT, as an organization, we're good at that. We're going to get information out to people. We have an obligation to make sure people know what's happening. We may want them to change their behavior in some way, so we're going to get information out. What does that look like? That looks like fact sheets, mailers, open houses where you're not really engaging, you're telling a story. You're giving people good information, okay? So then you go to the next one, and that's the consult column there. And that's one of those areas where if you were to develop in your project a couple alternatives, you've done an analysis, you've got a couple alternatives that you want to put out there, and you want some feedback. So you take it out to the community, whether it's a survey online, maybe you do an online open house or something like that, and it's a survey, and you take that out to the community and say, give us some feedback, and then you think about it. Maybe you can include something, maybe you get a new idea. That's good stuff. That's the consult side there. So that's focus groups, surveys, public meetings, those sort of things. Then you get involved, and we're going a little further more to the right side of the spectrum there. And you're going to be working more directly with the public, and it's about what is that they are directly included in the alternatives. So when you're developing the alternatives, before you go out and say, give me feedback on the alternatives, you're actually including them in the development of the alternatives. So what that might look like is charrettes, workshops, those sorts of things. Okay, now we go to collaborate. This is the citizen advisory groups. Yes?
So sorry to stop you.
No.
What is charrette?
Workshops. So workshops. So you're going to take some scenarios out to folks and you're going to kind of workshop that whole thing with them. Now collaborate. So you're going to say, you're with us on the whole ride. So you're going to help us develop alternatives. You're going to help us develop process. You're going to be with us the whole time. You're our partners in this. And we're going to take your feedback and we're going to incorporate your feedback. It doesn't mean it's not all the way to a vote. It's not all the way to decision making, but it's really including them in the whole process. Does that make sense? Then we get to the very far right. This is the scary one for a lot of government folks. This is we give the reins. All right, so in this, here's a trick question. In the design and construction phase at ODOT, when do we empower people? Put some parameters up and say, you get to decide. I heard when we have money. I heard never. Tribal land. Their money or their land. There's a lot of this more in the planning process. You're absolutely right. I'm going to go in front of the screen again. Okay. We had some fun with this on my crew. We were talking about it. I'm like, we got to come up with this. You know what it is? Sound walls. Anybody do a sound wall process? Yeah? So what do? You go out and you say, here's a process that we're going through, here's the information, and you're going to vote on it. And we're going to there's a whole process laid out, there's manuals, there's rules, there's procedures, it's all laid out, but they vote, and what they determine is the outcome. So I would argue, and if we had some real public policy wonks in here, they might argue with me because there's a lot of parameters on this, but I would still argue that's empowering. Now, with that, we have more of an obligation. The further right you go on that scale, there's more of an obligation on our part to make sure people know what they are giving us feedback or what they're voting on. If they're at a sound wall, we need to make sure that they understand and do all the outreach and engagement to make sure that they understand what they're voting on. Because if they don't know what they're voting on, how can they make an informed decision? Right? All right, so this is the IAP2 spectrum. I think it's a good thing to have. I may refer to it. It's pretty academic, but it does give you an idea. Again, there's no right answer, and there's reasons that you would land in all of these different areas depending on where you are. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. Do you have anything you want to add? All right. How are we doing on time? Yeah. Yeah.
And that causes you to move to another category.
Absolutely.
And is that something that you, in theory, should be somehow anticipating or planning for, or is that just going to be the case a lot of the time, or some of the time?
It's almost like that's a planted question for our next slide. Appreciate that. But yes, I'm being smart. But yes, that I think you should anticipate some of that. I'm going to argue that if you engage with your community affairs folks or your person that does public involvement and that's their expertise, their area of expertise, they're going to help you identify some of those things ahead of time so that you can put a little bit more work in up front so that you don't have to put a lot more work in down the line. That's that little investment at the beginning to get to the end. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide here. Why involve the public, right? Well, I like to say this kind of tongue-in-cheek because somebody told you you had to, right? That's why you involve the public. Well, we all know we have to, right? There's the PD-12. There's a form. ODOT has a form that we need to. It talks about it. It talks about why we would want to do it and why we need to do it. There's PI plans that are required at DAP. And I would argue that you should be doing public involvement way before DAP, right? So now those are all the reasons why you have to do it, but why would you want to do it? Why is it a good thing? Why is it going to make your life easier rather than harder? Right? I'm one of those people, I'd rather do something because it feels like it's the right thing to do than because somebody told me I had to. But the reason that we have things that say that you have to is because it's the right thing to do. So it's an easy place to get. So community ownership. What might that look like? Why would that be important? Supported? Because we're going to build it and we're going to go away and the community is still going to be there. So we're going to build something and it's not necessarily in our neighborhood. It's not right outside my door. We're going to build it and then we're going to go away. But the community has an opportunity with public involvement to have some ownership in it. Even if it's little things, that can make some community ownership. It's a good thing. Community expectations. It's different in every community. There are some communities that are like, listen, I pay my taxes. I don't want to see you. Just fix whatever it is and don't talk to me. That's what I expect. And there are some communities that are like, if you're going to do anything, there's going to be a committee and there's going to be a workshop and a this and a that. You have to know your community and you have to know your project because it's going to vary depending on the project as well. Learning things you didn't know before, different perspectives. I'm going to go back to, this is their community that we're going into with a project. They know their community. They may know something you don't know. They probably do know a few things they don't know. And we know a few things they don't. And getting together, the project is going to be better. Then you've got public trust, stewardship, and transparency. And we need to do it. It's credibility. It all goes to credibility. And ODOT's reputation and the trust of the community and being good stewards. And then because we need their help. By need their help, so I go back to like pavers and things like that. We may need them to change, the community to change their behaviors. So it would be better if we're going to do a big detour to have people know about it ahead of time and go, I'm going to take a different route than to have a huge queue. So we need their help. We need that. All right. Yeah, add.
To that because I don't think that it's possible, regardless of how extensive your outreach process starts from the beginning and how early you start, I don't think it's possible 100% of the time to not reach that moment at the end of a project where there's still pushback and you look back and you say, what could I have done better? No matter how hard you try, you probably will run into situations like that just because of the nature of some of the areas we work at. But going along the lines of public trust and stewardship, if you can get to the end of a project and you have that pushback and then they can still see where you were coming in, engaging them at those points along the way, at the very least they might be frustrated, but you still have a mutual level of respect that wouldn't have been there with a lack of communication.
Great. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Who communicates about our projects? So we've got leadership. Certainly they're going to communicate about our projects. We've got area managers, we know they're going to be communicating about our project. We've got project managers, CPMs, PLs, resident engineers. We've got all those people that we know that they're going to be communicating about our project. But then we've got some folks, and this is what I'm talking about, the community affairs, the public affairs, and the government affairs. I'm going to talk about this as if there's some bright lines. There are no bright lines. So all of these individuals are communicating information. It works best if there's coordination between all of these groups. Sometimes it's the same person that spans two of these categories in a region. So I would say there's good coordination there, especially when it's the same person. So community affairs, that is generally speaking going to be project-based. I even had to write it down because the lines are a little bit blurry. So that's going to be project-based. Those are the folks that are going to be going out and working with community members, working with community groups, setting up meetings, helping you with your outreach and your information in that way. Public affairs, generally speaking, these are going to be your PIOs, your spokespeople, your social media people, the ODOT social media folks, those sorts of individuals. Then you have your government affairs folks, and they're going to be working with legislators, electeds, local jurisdictions. Now, as I'm saying this, I'm sure some of you also work with those individuals. And that's to be expected because it's all about communicating with the public, communicating with our community, sharing information, ideas, getting feedback. But that's a basic way to kind of describe it. Now, if you're not in one of those groups, and you're confused, my advice is go to someone in one of those groups because they will be able to tell you exactly how it works in that region, in your region. So if you go to I'm going to go to the next slide. If you go to your next page, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but essentially what you're going to see here is you've got all these community affairs folks. Again, it's an eye chart, but go find your person and talk to them and ask them how they do this in your region and how they divvy up responsibilities. In Region 1, I do manage a team of several individuals, and we like very much to work with our project folks and our project delivery folks. Do you want to add anything before I go to the next slide?
I would just agree. I would emphasize that every region does it very differently from what I've observed. I'm familiar with how Region 4 handles our overlap of roles, but if you're in a different region, be sure to talk to your people because we've all got our systems worked out differently.
We've had some fun when we've been putting this presentation together and learning how things are done differently across the different regions. And there's consistency in what we're trying to deliver, but sometimes how you divvy up roles and responsibilities changes. So you'll notice here that there's no one for Region 5 for community affairs. I see somebody taking a picture. I'll let you finish that. Next slide, right? Okay, so here's the public affairs. So these are your spokespeople. And in Region 5, my understanding is that Tom Strandberg, he manages both the community affairs side and the public affairs side. So this is just to give you a chance of finding out who that individual is if you don't already know. Go make friends with them. That's important with both of these groups of folks. All right, so then the next slide here. Do you have anything on that one before? Okay. Boy, talking too much and not flipping the pages. So benefits of working with community affairs. So risk mitigation. We're really good at identifying potential risks in the community. That's our job. And so we can really help you. And I know you look for risk mitigation. So if you're doing project delivery and project management, you are looking at risks and you're figuring out, is it going to cost me time? Is it going to cost me money? All that sort of thing. We can help. Sometimes we do cost money. Oftentimes we do cost money. But I would argue that if we're working early, we're going to cost you less money than if it all goes south in the end. Know your requirements related to communication and engaging the public. So there are laws. There are laws around this, engaging the community. When you have a public meeting, there are laws. You want to follow the law. You want to follow the laws. You want to follow the regulations. And then there's just some standards in general that you need to follow. We know those. We work with you to determine public involvement and information timing. I like to call it sequencing. So it's like, when is the best time to actually send out a flyer? When is the best time for a project to have an open house? When is it going to be most effective? When are we going to get the most people? So you don't have the one where you get 2 people or no people. We can help you with that. Understanding political and community context, yep, and efficiencies. I will share this one. If you're sending out a mailer and you've got 2 projects, maybe one project's yours, maybe another project is someone else's, community affairs or the person doing that information in the mailer can say, you know what, we can send out one mailer for both of these projects because that community right there, those neighbors, don't know the difference. They don't know our numbering system. They don't need to know our numbering system of what we call projects and all of that. They just know there's going to be traffic impacts and they're going to be affected in some way. So we can help with that. So there's some efficiencies there. So then you're not sending out 2 mailers. You're sending out 1 mailer to the same group. We look organized, efficient. It's a good thing. All right, anything?
Oh, good.
I think it's yours now.
Yeah, okay. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about with you guys was just the elements that we can involve in your project delivery process. So this is just going to be pretty straightforward as we listed it. We've got scoping, PDTs, PI plans, access management, right-of-way, community engagement materials, open houses, noise review boards, noise notification, staging, detours, closures, and more than probably is listed here, but that gives you a basic idea of just a few of the primary things that we can do during your process that are going to make the transition into construction a lot easier. From a construction standpoint, we can also give information through Trip Check and other platforms. Obviously, noise notification, that's an important one. Advertising, answering public questions, social media, and more, if you guys can think of it. And of course, we're always interested in creative approaches and doing something in a different way. I think it can be easy to get into a rut of this is what we do, this is how we do it, but I'm sure all of you work with a variety of projects that are in very different geographical locations and cultural locations. So obviously there's no one size fits all for those elements. So going along those lines.
Oh yeah. So up there on the design side, those are elements where you might think to include somebody who is well versed in public involvement. So access management and right-of-way, you may not have a public involvement person necessarily involved in that. That's a whole nother process altogether. But I would argue that if you're going to go send right-of-way letters out to somebody, don't have that be the first piece of information, that letter that they get in the mail. Don't have that be the first information that they get about the project. That's going to start you off on the wrong foot. So I would say the reason we have those listed is make sure you are working closely with your community affairs or your public involvement folks so that you are sequencing or timing things so that it works out better for everyone.
That's funny. That was actually something I was talking about last night with Mike. Were you and I talking about that? The letters where people, yes. Okay. Well, we were talking about it can create a sense of panic if the first thing you receive involves your property and you haven't heard anything prior to that and it comes in a really official looking document. People don't understand that and they can't relate to it. So it does create a little bit of panic, because rightfully so, because they just don't know what's happening. So if we can approach it from a more familiar, welcoming format, then it eases some of that confusion and makes the whole process a little smoother for them. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So the first thing that we really want to hit home, and we kind of have touched on, is just to engage us early and keep us involved throughout the entire process. So we have a couple different types of public involvement that we do. And here's some photos. So we have online public involvement, which is a relatively newer thing. I'm curious, how many people here have done an online open house for a project? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, so a few. So that's a relatively newer thing that we've been doing, I think, within the last year. And yeah, I started I've been here a year. So that's my extent of knowledge, is that it's for sure been happening for a year. And that's a great tool. So I would encourage you to know that that is out there for you, for especially locations where people might not be able to attend or they're working and it's just easier for them to hop online. So obviously we have mailers, we have neighborhood and business associations, we do stakeholder meetings, community groups. Can anybody think of any type of public let me rephrase that. I would be curious to hear from your perspective in past experiences. Is there one type of outreach that you have seen to be a really effective way to take down the wall between that us and them mentality? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. Door-to-door, face-to-face. Yeah, that's definitely a good one. Personal interaction is always best, in my opinion. Yes.
Sure, I'll mention it from my perspective as the interim active transportation liaison, but going to these groups and meeting them where they are, so being a regular and having that established relationship, so that way you can talk to them about upcoming things and address a lot of these problems that may be sticky, like bike ped issues or ADA issues. Being at those groups and building that equity makes a huge difference.
Okay. Is there anybody else? Do you have one over there?
I'll talk about one that was in construction, just about to be delivered. It was a Pioneer Mountain project, and it had a lot of bad press over the years. Cost of overruns of hundreds of millions. The community was upset and up in arms about it. So, but before we opened up the highway to traffic, we had a play on the grade event where we opened it up to pedestrians and bicyclists. And we had the technical experts be at different stations and talk about the roadway, the guardrail, the slopes, the geotech, the culvert, traffic safety, bike and ped safety. And without a doubt, to the people that were there, they all said, things like, I had no idea that this project was so complicated and what you guys had to go through. And we got such a good reception from that. So it really did build on that trust and stewardship and all of that. Even, it was kind of a scary thing to do because we didn't know we were going to get rotten tomatoes thrown at us during this thing. But it was such a good experience. We just had a great time with it.
It's actually really funny that you mention Pioneer Mountain Eddyville because I was an intern for Region 2 during the time that we were planning the Play on the Grade event, and so I was there. And it was this definitely, I'm sure most people here are familiar with the controversial nature of that project, I guess would be how I said it. And so when you put yourself out there and you invite a whole community to come to a project that you've been working on for years and years and is a little contentious, yeah, it is scary. And it was a really cool day because we turned it into a celebration of what we as ODOT and them as a community had accomplished. And I think it really changed the perspective on, it went from being, look at what has happened to look at where we are. And so, yeah, it was really neat. Yeah, that's great. Those are some really good perspectives on things. I agree. I think that in person is always best, and it's kind of like what you'd mentioned, Chris, just finding a way to take away the elusiveness of what we do. As a community affairs person, I can say I don't understand most of your jobs, but my job isn't to do your job. My job is to take what you do and help someone else get to a point where they see the why behind it. And I think that's why we all work, because it's just the different disciplines have to go together.
Can I add a couple of tools? Yeah. So there's been some really great work being done with video. The communications team out of Salem has been doing some fantastic videos and flyover videos and whatnot. That can really help inform the community. That can also give them a base if you want to go further to the right-hand side on that public involvement spectrum. It can give them good information to help give feedback and be really informed. A simple infographic is well worth the time spent in developing it. It helps us educate the community, and it helps them know what's going on, and it can just really kind of calm the situation down a bit. So those were, and then detour maps. I know we do a lot of detour maps, but never underestimate a good detour map. I mean, if you're telling people they gotta change their behavior and they gotta go in a different direction, putting information out ahead of time that they can look at, I think those are three things I wanted to make sure to call out in addition to what you said.
That's good. Yeah, and I actually want to add on the video front, we are making more of a push to use multimedia communication, and I think that's really important because it's sensing where our culture is moving in terms of how we receive information, and that's a really valid one. So I would encourage you, even if it's something you've never done for your project, if you've got one coming up and you know it's going to be one that involves a lot of public outreach, I would encourage you to try and ask your outreach person if they would consider bringing that as an element into what you're doing. Even if you haven't before, I would try that because I think it's a really good tool we've got, and Salem has really they've been coming out with a lot of great content. So, okay, so estimating budgets. So yeah, I mean, public involvement needs don't scale up and down based on the size of the project. Who here has had a really small project that involved a lot of outreach? Has anyone experienced that before? Emerald? Yeah, what was your project? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, so basically I think it's just good to keep that in perspective. You might have, we were discussing this earlier, you might have a paving project, but if it's gonna impact properties, it can be the shortest paving project in the world, and you're still going to have to deal with outreach because you have to look at the impact to people, not the space or the scope. So think about the needs on a case-by-case basis, including staff scoping. So is it okay if I talk about consultant stuff here?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So kind of going along with that, one thing that we've talked about is the role between a consultant and your in-house community affairs coordinator, and it's really important to get us involved with that scoping for the outreach side of what you're looking at. There's a lot of overlap in some projects with what we do and what a consultant would do, but in general, we still need to know because primarily we have oversight over that throughout your project. That's our goal, is to make your life easier by facilitating outreach, and even if we're going to have a consultant do that, bring us into it, because that way we can know what to expect from the consultant, what to expect from us on our side of things, and how we're going to work together on that. And do you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say, you've been alluding to the partnership piece, so use us as your partners if you're looking at working with some consultants. We have expertise. We can look over a scope of work. We can look at an estimate and kind of do one of those. That seems right, or that doesn't seem right. If you need some expertise, some subject matter expertise, if you need to scale it up or down, you can work with a consultant or you can work with us. Some projects you're going to have a consultant come in for a small amount of time or for a small amount of work. Some of them you may have them do all of the PI. I would still argue that you need somebody from staff that has some subject matter expertise to partner with you on that. So use us as a resource.
Mm-hmm. Because a consultant can know their job, but they can't know. Sorry, I was looking at, she was holding up the timer, that was what I was doing there. A consultant can know what their job is, but they can't understand our culture, and they can't always understand our goal and our outcome that we're hoping for. So just keep that in mind. It's good for us to be having some level of oversight, because yeah, you really should see us, and I hope you will come away from this seeing us as partners with you in your project. We're not. We want to get you to the end as smoothly as possible, would be the goal. Okay, oh, well, there we go. We already did that one. Okay, so what should our PI goals and responsibilities be? Does anyone have an idea of, actually, you know what? I kind of want to skip this one. Okay, so we want to be your partner. That's what we'll say for now. Because this one I think is a little bit more, we don't talk about it as much. How do we know when there's enough public involvement for a project? Do you guys have any ideas about at what point you would say, you know what, this is good, that's all we need to do? Never enough. That's good, true. It's probably true.
Do you want to have them work in the tables for a minute?
Yeah, let's actually do that. Here, you guys at your table groups, why don't you chat about this for a second? How do we know what is enough public involvement for a project? And then we'll come back. Yeah. Hey guys, okay, so we're gonna bring everyone back together. I would love to hear from a few different groups about maybe one of their main points that they had on this. So what table wants to share?
Okay,
Oh.
over here.
She'll bring you a microphone.
This is like being on Oprah or something.
Yeah.
So we discussed it. We discussed it in our table, and we came up with few suggestions. Is when you don't know what is enough for PI for a project, when you hear something, complaint from the public all the time. That's one thing. Mm-hmm. And then when it does not turn to a political issue and you hear it from upper management, that's other thing. And then when you hear about your project through newspapers, so just that's
Right. It's always a
Anyone
red flag.
else? Excuse me?
So we were saying that it really depends on what the intent of the public involvement is. So on the sheet, if the intent is to inform once the mailers have gone out, maybe that's enough, And if the intent is to empower once the vote has happened, that maybe that's the end. But it really would depend on what's the purpose, and based on that, you'd have to figure out when enough is enough.
That's good. Okay, what about one more table?
One more. 3 times the charm, right?
Someone outside of Region 1.
Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? All right, Lisa.
I would suggest that we were talking about it, of course, and our suggestion is that every project consider having a communication plan. You look at your stakeholders, you look at your risks, you look at any type of detours you're going to have, any closures in particular, and then as the life of the project goes along, you adjust accordingly. So it's never etched in stone, it's never set. You have to be malleable, you have to be flexible so that you can react and really partner with those people in a sincere way. And so that whole transparency thing and making sure that you're maintaining those partnerships that you've had for years is so essential. You're coming back with another project soon, maybe, you never know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's huge. I think especially what you touched on with adaptability, because our projects do fluctuate, and that's where the partnership between your communications person and your project comes in, because as your project shifts and comes in and out, they need to be aware of those changes, because that's when adjustments are made to our outreach plans. So one thing that we had talked about, because it is hard to say that there's ever enough, especially for more contentious projects, but one way to look at it is that there will, I don't want to say never, but there will most likely never be a time where you finish a project and you go to construction and everybody's happy, right? I think we can all probably agree on that. So everybody may not be happy, but at the end of your outreach process, the goal would be that everybody feels that they have been heard and that they understand what you're doing and there are no surprises. So they might not love the project that you're going through with, but they can see the why behind it. And when you go to construction, they're not gonna feel like they were caught off guard by what's happening because they've been aware of it throughout the process. So is there anything you wanna add to that?
A couple of things. So on all of those things, exactly all the things that you were all saying, those are good ways to know if there's been enough PI. We also look for indicators and cues. So an example would be you send out a mailer, and if there's crickets, I get nervous because there should be a phone number on there and somebody's gonna call that number or somebody's gonna send an email. So we have an indicator that people are getting the mailer and that information is going out. So we've got some indicators. Another good one we did, I'm gonna pick on the sound wall again, we did some sound wall outreach. And because it was all the way on the spectrum into Empower, we knew we had an obligation to do a lot of information to the community and make sure they knew exactly what they were voting on. So we did canvassing, we did mailers, we did an open house, we did more canvassing, and then we needed to extend because we didn't get quite the number that met the threshold. So then we were out on our last round of canvassing. And there was a group of individuals that just hadn't voted, and we wanted to make sure they knew this is their opportunity, right? And they knocked on the folks knocked on their door to say, "Hey, we're ODOT, and we're here to bring you some information." And they said, "Thank you. We know we don't want to vote. We're okay either way. We got it. We know you had an open house, and we know what it is. Your information, your infographic here, really helped us understand. We think it's pretty cut and dried. Thanks." And folks are like, "Oh my gosh. Are we annoying the public now?" I said, no, that's a good indicator. That's a good indicator. We weren't going to continue to go knock on doors because that would be a waste of money and then we would be annoying. But at that point, we were looking for an indicator that showed that people really did know and they were making a choice. They didn't want to vote. They were okay either way. So those are a couple indicator pieces. You want me to go on to the last piece here? So I want to come back around at the very beginning when I was saying, what was your experience with public involvement? And I heard some things about scary, like with community meetings with a lot of angry individuals and neighbors. And sometimes it feels easier to say, let's see if we can just kind of fly under the radar because we hear something brewing over here. We're just going to go get it done and hope nobody notices. Okay, the chances of nobody noticing when you take big equipment out and go do something to a road is very low. So I would say if you think, oh my gosh, I hope that nobody notices, that is your cue to go look for somebody that can help you figure out a strategy that's going to make that not a bad situation. So if you want to run away, don't do that. Go grab somebody else and bring them with you into it, and it'll turn out okay. And then the whole thing of if you build it and no one shows up, we hope that doesn't happen because we want to make sure that we're putting the time and energy into things that people want to come out and see and participate. But if that happens and you know you have done everything that you can do and you can point back to all the ways that you have tried to engage the community and you do this workshop and no one shows up, I always tell people at the very least, you're able to explain to them all the opportunities that they had and how you reached out to them. So, and then when somebody calls you and says, we hear from the community that you didn't give them any opportunity, you can point back to all of those things. I never like to see public involvement as a check the box kind of thing, but sometimes you need to be able to say, these were the opportunities that we provided. So do it in earnest and then make sure that you have something to point back to if people really are not wanting to engage, they're just wanting to fight. But going back to the orange example, I still maintain, I'm a little bit of a Pollyanna, I still maintain that everybody can get what they need if you dig a little deeper and take a little time. So those are my parting words. We'll open it up to question. Do you have anything else?
I think that's great,
Okay.
yeah.
Do you have any questions? Perfect, it's all super clear.
When there's no questions, it means you did perfection, right?
I don't know about that, but look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, Alia, really appreciate it.